So the best form of progressively overloading, wait for it, is not progressively overloading.
DRAMATIC.
Now, I know that's a big statement and
Dramatic.
very much contradictory. By the end of the video, I think you will at least understand my point of view. You might not agree with me, but that's what the internet is for, right? So there's something known as Godwin's law, and I'll put it on the screen here. And this is where, wait a minute, that's something else. No, Goodhart's law. So this is where when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And this is true in a lot of cases about progressive overload. So basically, if you focus on one aspect of training to the exclusion of everything else, that is no longer a useful thing to do. And this is true of progressive overload. Let's say you always want to add weight to the bar. You're doing, say, a 5x5 program, very, very basic, and it says to add weight every single workout. And so you do that. You follow the program, you stick to it religiously. This can lead to all kinds of problems because you cannot progress linearly forever. It's just not possible. And even though progressive overload is the law,
another day, another quarter. Point, simple, point blank.
And it's required to do, at some point there will be a plateau. There will be a period of stagnation. And if you try to push through this too much, you're just going to stagnate even more, or your technique will break down, or you'll get injured, or any number of bad things can happen. So I think it's important to realize that in the long term, progressive overload should absolutely be a goal. However, in the short term, it might not be possible, and it might actually be better to progress in other ways, not just adding weight or sets or reps. And if it's one thing I've noticed, it's that people like to measure things. We like to measure progress. We get this nice little bump of dopamine or surge of dopamine in some cases when it's a personal best, and we like progress. It's a hallmark of humanity, if you will. However, in a lot of cases, you're better off not progressing. Stick with the same weight, the same reps, the same sets. As a coach, sometimes I have to tell people, all right, we're going to stick with the same weight next week. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. You might even need to go down in weight, and that might be optimal for your long-term progress. And so reps, sets, weights are a very attractive way to progress. However, they are not the only way. What about mind-muscle connection? It is definitely a thing. And just because you're using the same weight in the short term doesn't mean you haven't progressed. If you are controlling it better, perhaps a slower tempo, adding a pause on your lateral raises, if you can go from doing sets of 10 and it looks, kind of sloppy in the lateral raise to really controlling the weight, pushing outward, pausing at the top, that could be like a year worth of progress or even more. Bar speed could be faster. If you used to bench 100 kilos and it was a total grinder and now it flies up, you've progressed. Absolutely. Even if you're touching the same weight. Why did I say touching? That sounds dirty. And yes, bar speed is measurable, but most people don't really measure it. So I'm going to put it in the non-measurable category. Same thing for tempo. If you can control the eccentric more and it's slower, that is progression, even if most people aren't really measuring or counting the tempo of their reps. Same thing for range of motion. If you used to quarter squat 100 kilos, and then you half squat it, then you parallel squat it, and now you can ass to grass it with a pause, under control, with better technique, that is a huge amount of progression. That could be a year or more worth of progression, even if the overload, the amount of weight on the bar, is exactly the same. Another is your confidence. If the first time you did 2 plates in the bench press, you had to have a spotter there, or it had to be in a power rack, and now you can do it in a non-power rack, same sets, same reps, but you just, it's pretty routine, you don't need a spotter, that's progression. Same thing with your state of mind. If you had to get really hyped up before a set, drink a bunch of caffeine, etc., and now it's just sort of like, just a normal weight, normal working set, that is absolutely progression as well. Same thing with effort. If the first time you did it, it was like an all-out Herculean effort, and now it's just kind of normal, absolutely, that is progressing, even if the weight, again, is the same. And this even goes for reps in reserve. If the first time you did it, a set of 5 was genuinely 10 RPE, 0 reps in reserve, and now you can do it with like 2, 3, 4, 5, or even more reps in reserve. Now it's just a warm-up, the same weight, that's progression, okay? I would still recommend adding weight to the bar in the extreme, but if, over the course of a few weeks, an RPE 10 turns into an RPE 9, and then a few weeks later it's an RPE 8, that is a form of progression, even if you didn't actually add any weight to the bar. Long term, again, you're going to want to add weight. But short term, it might actually be better to wait and to actually purposefully hit a plateau, at least going by the book, by the numbers. And this takes a certain amount of maturity, patience, and wisdom. To hit a new personal best, realize it felt really, really tough and looked a little bit sloppy, and to not go up in weight next week. Realizing sticking with the same weight, which isn't progressive overload, might actually be the best possible option. Or perhaps even going down in weight and making it look a little bit more crisp, or getting a slightly lower RPE, that kind of thing. So long term, progressive overload is definitely very important. And I think most people would be well served by taking that kind of mindset. But especially on isolation movements, you don't necessarily need to progressively overload every single session, especially if it's a relatively large jump. So if your dumbbells in the gym go from 10 kilos to 15 kilos, and you're doing lateral raises, you might need to stick with that 10 kilos for a really, really long time. It might take a year to go from 10 kilos to 15 kilos because it is a small jump in absolute numbers, but relatively speaking, it is a massive increase. And when an account like Squat University puts a huge premium on technique over progressive overload, I get that. There's a grain of truth there where you can't just progressively overload and let your technique go to shit. Again, if that is the only target that you have, you are definitely missing the big picture. Technique is important, overload is important, mind-muscle connection. Someone like Ryan Humiston, when he says progressive overload sucks, well, he's strawmanning, but there's a grain of truth there where a lot of people are progressively overloading, but they're doing it in such a way where everything else suffers. And progressively overloading is generally not worth having bad technique or getting injured or any of those other potential negative ramifications. So just some food for thought. You can stay with a certain weight until you make it your bitch. Then you go up in weight and the weight is kind of, switching things around on you. And then gradually you are now dominating the weight. And then you just sort of go up and up and up and up. But you don't have to go up every single session. You can do it gradually and then all at once. Gradually all at once, a form of step loading. All right, that's all for this video. Like, subscribe, share, comment. I think that's part of the reason the YouTube algorithm doesn't like me. You guys are not arguing enough in the comments below. So, get some arguments going, call each other some mean names. Okay, maybe not mean names, but just, get after a little bit. Which side are you on, progressive overload or not progressive overload? I'm supposed to ask a question here. I don't know. I'm a bad YouTuber. And I will see all of y'all in the next video. Peace.